In the sunlit common room of a New Orleans care home, an old upright piano stands against the wall, its mahogany finish worn smooth by decades of hands, its ivory keys yellowed with age. Most days, residents shuffle past it without a second glance. It's just furniture, another relic gathering dust in a building full of memories. But every Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock, something extraordinary happens. A frail figure makes his way across the room, his walker clicking softly against the linoleum floor. His hands, gnarled with arthritis, spotted with age, reach out and find the piano bench. He settles, slowly, takes a breath that seems to carry the weight of a century, and places his trembling fingers on the keys. And then, magic. The room transforms. Notes pour out like liquid gold, rich, impossibly beautiful, achingly precise. It's not just music, it's a conversation with time itself, a bridge spanning more than 100 years of joy and sorrow, struggle and triumph. One by one, residents appear in doorways. Staff members pause mid-task. Someone starts to weep, because they all know everyone in this building knows that they're witnessing something rare, something sacred. This is Clarence Washington. His friends call him Clay. He's 107 years old, and he's the oldest living concert pianist in the world. But that's not what makes his story extraordinary. What makes it extraordinary is that for most of his life, people told him he had no right to touch a piano at all. This is the story of music that was forbidden talent, that refused to be silenced, and a legacy that shattered every barrier put in its way. This is the story of a man who proved that art belongs to everyone, and that some voices, no matter how long they're suppressed, will always find a way to sing. Clarence Washington was born in 1917 in a sharecropper's cabin outside Baton Rouge, Louisiana. His father worked the fields from sunup to sundown, breaking his back for a white landowner who paid barely enough to survive. His mother took in washing her hands, raw and red, from lye soap and hot water. They were poor. Not the romanticized, noble kind of poor you see in movies. The desperate kind, the hungry kind. The kind where a 4-year-old boy wore his older brother's shoes stuffed with newspaper, and dinner was often nothing more than cornmeal and hope. But young Clarence, everyone called him Clay, because of the reddish Louisiana soil that stained his bare feet had something his family didn't even know to look for. He had an ear. When his mother hummed while she worked, he could repeat the melody perfectly. When the church choir sang on Sundays, he memorized every harmony. Music was in his bones. But in 1921, Louisiana music for black children meant spirituals and work songs, nothing more. Certainly not the kind of music that came from the big house up the road. The big house belonged to the Beaumont family. Mrs. Catherine Beaumont was a wealthy widow from New Orleans who summered on the plantation, and she had a Steinway grand piano shipped all the way from New York. Clay first heard that piano on a sweltering August afternoon when he was 4 years old. He'd been sent to deliver eggs to the kitchen, and as he walked past an open window, he froze. The sound stopped him dead in his tracks. It was like nothing he'd ever heard, cascading notes that seemed to tumble over each other like water over rocks, melody woven through with something complex and beautiful that he didn't have words for yet. Years later, he'd learn it was Chopin, a nocturne. But in that moment, all he knew was that he needed to be closer to that sound, the way a drowning man needs air. He stood outside that window for 20 minutes, eggs growing warm in his hands, completely transfixed. When the music stopped, he felt like he'd been woken from a dream. He delivered the eggs and walked home in a daze. But he came back. Every chance he got, whenever Mrs. Beaumont played Clay, would find a reason to be near that window. He started to recognize patterns. He understood that the black keys made different sounds than the white ones. He began to hear structure in what had seemed like pure magic. And then one day, he was 5 years old. He did something that could have gotten him killed. Mrs. Beaumont had gone into town. The house was empty except for the kitchen staff. And Clay, driven by a compulsion he didn't fully understand, slipped through a side door and walked straight to that piano. His heart hammered in his chest. He knew he wasn't supposed to be there. Black folks didn't enter the main house unless they were cleaning it. They certainly didn't touch expensive instruments that cost more than their families would earn in a lifetime. But his hands were already moving. He climbed onto the bench, his feet dangling well above the pedals, and he touched a key. Just one. Middle C. The note rang out pure and clear, and Clay felt something unlock inside his chest. He pressed another key, then another. And then, without quite knowing how his small fingers found the melody he'd heard Mrs. Beaumont play. It was clumsy, halting, full of mistakes. But it was recognizable. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear the door open. Didn't hear the footsteps approaching. "What do you think you're doing?" Clay spun around so fast he nearly fell off the bench. Mrs. Beaumont stood in the doorway, still wearing her hat and gloves from town. Her face was unreadable. Terror flooded through him. He'd heard stories about what happened to black children who stepped out of line. His mind raced with images of his father being whipped, his family being thrown off the land, all because he couldn't resist the pull of piano keys. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I heard you playing and I..." "Play that again," Mrs. Beaumont said. Clay blinked. "Ma'am, that melody. Play it again." With shaking hands, Clay turned back to the piano. He found the notes again, painfully aware of every mistake, every wrong key, every place where his small hands couldn't stretch to reach the right chord. When he finished, silence filled the room. Clay didn't dare look up. Finally, Mrs. Beaumont spoke. "How long have you been listening?" "Since last summer, ma'am." "Outside the window. I never came inside before, I swear. You taught yourself that. Just from listening." Clay nodded. Mrs. Beaumont walked closer. She studied him for a long moment. This small, barefoot black child sitting at her Steinway grand in an era where such a thing was not just unusual, but dangerous. She should have sent him away, should have told his father, should have forbidden him from ever coming near her house again. Instead, she did something that would change both their lives. "Come back tomorrow," she said. 3 o'clock. Use the kitchen door. And for God's sake, don't tell anyone." And that's how Clarence Clay Washington's real education began. In secret. In defiance of every social norm and legal restriction of Jim Crow, Louisiana. 3 times a week, while Mrs. Beaumont's neighbors assumed she was resting, she was teaching a sharecropper's son to read music, to understand theory, to play the works of Mozart and Beethoven and Brahms. It was illegal. It was dangerous. And it was the most important thing that ever happened to either of them. By the time Clay was 13, he could play everything Mrs. Beaumont put in front of him. Sonatas, concertos, fugues. His fingers had grown strong and sure. His understanding of music had deepened into something profound. He wasn't just playing notes anymore. He was speaking a language. But the world he lived in had no place for a black classical pianist. Jim Crow laws were tightening across the South. Segregation wasn't just practiced, it was enforced with violence. Black musicians were supposed to play jazz and blues in juke joints and speakeasies. Classical music concert halls, formal training, those belonged to white people. The very idea of a black teenager mastering Rachmaninoff was seen as presumptuous at best, threatening at worst. Mrs. Beaumont knew this. "You're too talented to waste," she told Clay when he was 14. "But I can't give you what you need anymore. You need proper conservatory training. You need to be around other serious musicians. And that's not going to happen here." She tried to help. She wrote letters to music schools up north, places that in theory admitted black students. Most never replied. The few that did sent polite rejections. "We don't feel Mr. Washington would be a good fit for our program at this time." Translation: "We don't want his kind here." So Clay found another path. At night he played piano in the back rooms of Storyville establishments, the black neighborhoods where jazz was being born. He accompanied singers who had voices like Honey and Heartbreak. He learned to improvise, to feel the rhythm in his bones, to make a piano talk and cry and shout. He was living two musical lives. By day, in secret still, he practiced Chopin and Liszt in Mrs. Beaumont's parlor. By night, he played stride piano and boogie-woogie in clubs where the air was thick with cigarette smoke and whiskey and the kind of raw emotion that classical training couldn't teach. Both were essential. Both made him who he was, but neither could give him what he wanted most, the chance to walk onto a real concert stage and show the world what he could do. When Clay was 16, Mrs. Beaumont died. She left him her upright piano, not the Steinway grand that went to relatives, and a letter. In it, she apologized for not being brave enough to fight harder for him. She told him his talent was a gift from God, and that it would be a sin to waste it. She urged him to never ever give up, and she left him $500 a fortune to a sharecropper's son. Clay used that money to leave Louisiana. He took a train north to Chicago, carrying everything he owned in a battered suitcase, with Mrs. Beaumont's upright piano following in a freight car that cost him half his inheritance. Chicago, in 1933, was not the promised land. The Depression had hit black communities hardest. Jobs were scarce. Racism was just as real as it had been in the South, just less openly violent. But Chicago had something Louisiana didn't: a thriving black music scene, and just maybe a sliver of opportunity. Clay found work playing in South Side clubs. He practiced classical pieces in a rented room so small his piano barely fit. He auditioned for every music program he could find, swallowing his pride every time they turned him away. And then, in 1935, something shifted. The Chicago Conservatory of Music, under pressure from civil rights activists and facing declining enrollment during the Depression, quietly began accepting a small number of black students. Very small, as in 2 per year, but it was a crack in the door. Clay auditioned. He played Beethoven's Pathétique Sonata with everything he had, every lesson from Mrs. Beaumont, every night in smoky clubs, every ounce of hunger and hope, and barely suppressed rage at a world that had tried to keep him from this moment. When he finished, the audition panel sat in silence. Finally, the director spoke. "We'll be in touch." 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. Clay's hands shook as he opened it. "We are pleased to offer you admission." He read that line 5 times before it felt real. He was in. He was actually in. He had no way of knowing it yet, but he was about to become only the 3rd black student to ever graduate from the Chicago Conservatory of Music, and the first to go on to an international concert career. The door hadn't just cracked open. Clay was about to kick it off its hinges. The Chicago Conservatory in 1935 was a world Clay had only imagined. grand practice rooms with perfect acoustics, faculty members who had studied in Vienna and Paris, Steinway Grands, plural, available to any student who wanted one. Resources that would have seemed like fantasy back in that sharecropper's cabin. But it was also a world that didn't want him there. On his first day, Clay walked into his music theory class to find every seat taken except for one row in the very back that remained conspicuously empty. When he sat down, the white students on either side gathered their books and moved. The professor didn't intervene, didn't even acknowledge it had happened. In practice rooms, people would suddenly remember they needed to be somewhere else when Clay signed up for a slot. In ensemble rehearsals, other pianists would whisper to each other when he played, snickering at mistakes, silent when he played perfectly. Faculty members gave him feedback that ranged from coldly professional to openly hostile. One professor told him directly, "You people have jazz. That's your music. Why are you trying to steal ours?" Clay wanted to quit 100 times that first year. Wanted to walk out, go back to the clubs where at least people appreciated what he could do, where his skin color was normal rather than an affront. But every time he thought about leaving, he remembered Mrs. Beaumont's letter. He remembered his mother's hands raw from washing other people's clothes. He remembered every door that had been slammed in his face. And he sat down at the piano and worked harder. He practiced 6 hours a day. 8. 10. While other students went to parties and football games, Clay was in a practice room perfecting runs and trills until his fingers ached. He memorized pieces his classmates were still reading. He learned to play through mistakes so subtle no one but him would notice them. And slowly, grudgingly, people started to pay attention. It happened first in a master class during his second year. A visiting pianist from New York, a white man who knew nothing about conservatory politics, heard Clay play Liszt's La Campanella, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the repertoire. When Clay finished, the visiting artist stood up and applauded. That he said to the room is how it's supposed to sound. The rest of you take notes. The students who'd been mocking Clay fell silent. The professor who'd told him to stick to jazz looked away, and Clay realized something. His hands on those keys were undeniable. People could hate him. They could wish he wasn't there. But they couldn't unhear what he'd just played. His breakthrough performance came in 1938 during his final year. Every graduating senior had to give a recital, a full evening concert open to the public, where they demonstrated everything they'd learned. For most students, it was a formality. For Clay, it was a trial. The conservatory's concert hall seated 400 people. The week before, Clay's recital flyers appeared around campus: keep classical music pure. Boycott the Washington recital. Someone painted a slur on his practice room door. He received anonymous letters telling him he'd be better off dead than disgracing the stage. The night of the recital, Clay stood backstage, hands shaking, wondering if he'd walk out to an empty hall, or worse, to an audience there to heckle and humiliate him. The stage manager gave him the signal. Clay took a breath, pushed through the curtain and walked to the piano. The hall wasn't empty. It wasn't full either, maybe 150 people scattered through the seats. Some were faculty members required to attend. Some were his fellow students. But at the front, filling the first 3 rows, were people Clay had never expected to see. Black families from the South Side dressed in their Sunday best, who'd heard through church networks that one of their own was playing at the conservatory. They'd saved up for tickets. They'd traveled across the city. They were there to witness history. Clay sat at the piano. He placed his hands on the keys, and then he played. He opened with Bach the Goldberg variations, precise and mathematical and beautiful. He played Chopin nocturnes that sang like prayers. He played Beethoven's Appassionata with such fury and fire that people sat forward in their seats. And he closed with his own arrangement of spirituals, Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, and Deep River, woven through with classical techniques, proving that these traditions weren't separate, but part of the same human impulse to turn pain into beauty. When he finished, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then someone in the front row, an elderly black woman, stood up. Then another. Then another. Soon all 3 rows were on their feet, applauding with tears streaming down their faces. The rest of the audience had a choice. They could sit there silent, revealing their prejudice for everyone to see. Or they could join the standing ovation. One by one, they stood. Not everyone. Not even most. But enough. Enough to matter. A music critic from the Chicago Tribune was there that night. His review ran the next day. Last night, a young Negro pianist proved that talent recognizes no color line. Mr. Washington's technique is flawless, his interpretation mature beyond his years. The question is not whether he belongs on the concert stage. The question is whether the concert stage deserves him. That review changed everything. Within a month, Clay had offers for performances, small venues, modest fees, but real paying work as a classical pianist. Within a year, he was touring the Midwest, playing in cities where some hotels wouldn't give him a room, but concert halls would give him a stage. He became a symbol. Every time he played, he was carrying the weight of possibility for everyone who looked like him. Every time he walked onto a stage, he was proving that excellence couldn't be segregated. It was exhausting, it was lonely, it was dangerous. It was also the most important work of his life. The 1940s brought Clay both his greatest triumphs and his deepest joys. He was touring constantly now, sometimes with orchestras, sometimes solo, always carrying the dual burden of performing brilliantly and representing his entire race. No white pianist had to be perfect every time. Clay did. In 1943, he performed at Carnegie Hall. Not as a headliner, he was part of a benefit concert for war bonds, but he was there. A black classical pianist on the most famous stage in America. The performance was broadcast on radio. Back in Louisiana, his mother listened on a neighbor's set, crying quietly in the dark. But it was in a Chicago jazz club, not a concert hall, that Clay's life truly changed. He'd gone to hear a singer everyone was talking about, Dorothy Hayes, a vocalist who could make a ballad sound like a love letter and an up-tempo number sound like freedom itself. She was beautiful, talented, and utterly fearless. When she sang, the whole room leaned in. After her set, Clay found himself at the bar next to her. He meant to just say hello to compliment her performance. But she recognized him. "You're the piano player," she said, "the classical one. I heard you play once at a church benefit. You were incredible." They talked until the club closed. About music, about the strange lives they were living, about what it meant to be artists in a world that wanted to put them in boxes. Dorothy understood the pressure Clay lived under. She carried her own version of it. They married 6 months later in 1944, and for the first time in his life, Clay had a partner who truly understood him. Dorothy never gave up her career. She sang while Clay toured, and sometimes they performed together unprecedented evening, where jazz standards and classical arias shared the same stage. They were a power couple before that term existed, each pushing the other to be braver, more innovative, more themselves. In 1947, their daughter Angela was born. In 1949, their son Robert. Clay was on the road constantly, But when he came home, he was fully present. He played piano while Dorothy sang lullabies. He taught Angela scales before she could read words. He made sure both children understood that music wasn't just their parents' job. It was their heritage, their language, their resistance. The 1950s were Clay's peak years. He performed with major orchestras. He played at colleges and concert halls across the country. He recorded albums, classical repertoire, and jazz standards that sold modestly but were critically acclaimed. He became a regular at civil rights benefits, using his platform to support the movement. In 1955, he performed at a concert in Montgomery, Alabama, scheduled just days after Rosa Parks' arrest. The venue tried to enforce segregated seating. Clay refused to play unless everyone sat where they wanted. After 2 hours of tense negotiation, the venue relented. That night, black and white audience members sat side by side, maybe the first time that had happened in that concert hall. Clay played as if his life depended on it. In some ways, it did, but success came with costs. The constant travel strained his family. Angela and Robert grew up with a father who was often absent, chasing a dream that seemed to matter more than they did, though that wasn't true, and they'd understand it later. But children don't see the bigger picture. They just see an empty chair at dinner. Dorothy held everything together. She managed the household, continued her own career, raised 2 children, essentially, as a single mother for long stretches. She never complained, at least not where Clay could hear, but he knew the weight she carried. He saw it in her eyes when he left for another tour, felt it in the way she held him a little tighter when he came home. "We're building something bigger than us," she told him once, when he confessed he felt guilty for being gone so much. Those children who see you on stage, who realize for the first time that they could do what you do that matters. What you're doing matters. Don't forget that. She was right. Clay got letters, hundreds of them, from young black musicians who'd heard him play and decided they could pursue classical music too. He was opening doors just by walking through them, creating possibilities just by existing. But success in America didn't mean success everywhere. In 1958, Clay toured Europe for the first time. He played in Paris, London, Vienna, Berlin. And he experienced something he'd never felt before. He was judged purely as a musician. Not as a black musician, just as a musician. In Paris, a critic wrote Mr. Washington's interpretation of Debussy rivals any pianist working today. His touch is exquisite, his musicality profound. This is artistry at its finest. No mention of race, no qualifiers, just recognition of talent. It was intoxicating. It was also heartbreaking, because it showed him what he'd been denied his entire life: the simple right to be evaluated on merit alone. He came home from that tour changed, more convinced than ever that the fight was worth it, but also more aware of how far America still had to go. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, but progress was slow and purchased with blood. Clay threw himself into the cause, performing at benefit after benefit, speaking at rallies, using his platform to amplify voices calling for change. In 1963, he performed at the March on Washington, the same day Martin Luther King gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. Clay played Beethoven's Ode to Joy on a portable piano, surrounded by 250,000 people. When he finished, Dr. King shook his hand. "You're showing them," Dr. King said, "that excellence has no color. Keep playing. It matters more than you know." Those words sustained Clay through the dark days that followed assassinations, riots, the slow, grinding heartbreak of watching the country tear itself apart. Music was his contribution to the struggle. Every perfect performance was an act of resistance. Every standing ovation was a small victory. But by the end of the 1960s, Clay was tired. He'd been fighting for 30 years. He'd opened doors, changed minds, proved himself 1,000 times over, and he was only 50 years old. The hardest battles were still ahead. The 1970s were unkind to classical music. Funding dried up. Orchestras folded. Concert halls closed or switched to more profitable programming. The audiences that remained were aging and shrinking. Young people had other interests: rock and roll, soul, funk. Classical music started to feel like a relic. For Clay, work became scarce. The tours that had once filled his calendar dwindled to a handful of performances a year. The recording contracts dried up. The phone stopped ringing with offers. He was only in his 50s, still at the height of his abilities, but the industry had moved on. And if it was hard for white, classical musicians, it was nearly impossible for black ones. The doors Clay had fought so hard to open were slowly closing again. Money became tight. The Washington family had never been wealthy, but they'd been comfortable. Now Dorothy was taking extra gigs, sometimes 2 or 3 a week, to make ends meet. They'd bought a modest house in Chicago's South Shore neighborhood, and some months they struggled to make the mortgage. Clay could have given up, could have taken a job doing anything else. But music was all he knew, all he'd ever wanted. And then one day, sitting in his living room, staring at his piano, and wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake, dedicating his life to an art form that didn't want him, he had a realization. If he couldn't perform, he could teach. If concert halls didn't want him, maybe young musicians would. He started small. A handwritten sign in the window of a South Side community center: piano lessons. All ages, sliding scale. He charged whatever families could afford. Sometimes that was $20 an hour. Sometimes it was $5. Sometimes it was nothing but a promise that the student would practice. The students came slowly at first. Then word spread. Clay wasn't just teaching piano. He was teaching the same way Mrs. Beaumont had taught him, with rigor and love and absolute belief in his students' potential. He taught kids from the projects who'd never touched a piano before. He taught teenagers who thought classical music was boring until he showed them the rebellion hidden in Beethoven, the sensuality in Chopin, the mathematical beauty in Bach. He taught adults who'd given up on dreams decades ago and wanted one more chance. And he taught for free, almost all the time for free. Dorothy understood. She always understood. "You're investing in futures," she said. "That's worth more than money." Some of Clay's students went on to study at conservatories. Some became professional musicians. Most didn't. Most just learned to love music, to have one beautiful thing in lives that were often hard. And that was enough. But Clay poured everything into teaching. His days became a blur of lessons, 5, 6, 7 a day. His fingers, which had once danced over keys with impossible speed, started to ache. Arthritis was creeping in slowly at first, then more noticeably. By his 60s, he had to warm up for 30 minutes before he could play anything demanding. He rarely performed anymore, partly because the opportunities weren't there, partly because his body was betraying him. The same hands that had played Carnegie Hall now struggled with passages he'd once executed flawlessly. It was humbling, it was painful, but he kept teaching, because that's what he had left to give. In 1985, Clay's son Robert, who'd become a lawyer, making his parents proud, even though he never pursued music professionally, asked him a question. "Dad, do you have any regrets about the career, the choices you made?" Clay thought about it for a long time. "I wish the world had been different," he said finally. "I wish I could have just been a pianist, not a cymbal. I wish I could have played for the love of music, not to prove a point. But if I'd been born white, I probably would have had an easier career, but a smaller impact. So no regrets." The 1990s brought new challenges. Clay's arthritis worsened. He developed diabetes. His eyesight started failing. He had to stop teaching as many students had to cut back to just a few lessons a week. And then in 2015, Dorothy died. They'd been married 71 years. She'd been his partner, his champion, his compass. When she sang, he accompanied her. When he played, she listened like it was the first time. They'd grown old together, their love deepening into something that transcended romance, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Her death broke something in Clay. He was 98 years old, and for the first time in his life, he didn't want to play piano. Didn't want to do anything. His daughter Angela flew in from Seattle. His son Robert came from Atlanta. They tried to comfort him, but grief doesn't listen to reason. For 3 months, Clay didn't touch a piano. The longest he'd gone without playing since he was 4 years old. It was Robert who finally got through to him. "Mom wouldn't want this," he said. "She'd want you to play. She loved hearing you play. So play for her." That night, Clay sat at his piano, the same upright Mrs. Beaumont had left him 80 years earlier, somehow still functional, and he played Dorothy's favorite song, "My Funny Valentine." He played it the way she liked it, slow and tender, with all the emotion he couldn't put into words. And he cried. Finally, fully, he cried. The grief poured out through his fingers, through the music, until he was empty and exhausted, and for the first time since she'd died, able to breathe. He was 98 years old. His career was long over. His wife was gone. His hands barely worked, but he still had music. That would have to be enough. In 2016, at 99 years old, Clay could no longer live alone. The house was too big, the stairs too dangerous. His children wanted him to move in with one of them, but Clay refused. "You have your own lives," he told them. "I'm not going to be a burden." Angela found Golden Years Care Home in New Orleans, a clean, well-run facility that happened to have an old upright piano in the common room. "It's not Chicago," she told her father. "But it's where our roots are, where you started. Maybe it's a good place to finish." Clay moved to New Orleans with one suitcase, a box of photos, and Mrs. Beaumont's piano, which the care home staff graciously allowed him to keep in his room, though it took up most of the space. At first he hated it. Hated the institutional food, the cheerful nurses who talked to him like he was a child, the other residents who watched game shows all day and couldn't remember his name. He'd lived such a full life, fought so hard, accomplished so much. And this was how it ended, in a building that smelled like disinfectant and defeat. But slowly, almost against his will, Clay adapted. He established a routine. Breakfast at 7. A walk around the grounds if his knees allowed it. Reading in the afternoon, he'd developed a taste for mystery novels of all things. Dinner at 5. And every Sunday at 3 o'clock, he made his way to the common room piano. The first time he played, most residents ignored him. The piano was just furniture to them, background noise. But a few people drifted over. An elderly woman named Ruth, who said the music reminded her of her youth. A man named James, a former jazz bassist, who understood what Clay was doing. Word spread slowly through the building. The new guy can really play. People started showing up on Sunday afternoons, curious to see what the fuss was about. Clay played everything. Classical pieces from his concert days, though simpler, now adjusted for hands that didn't have their old flexibility. Jazz standards that made people smile and tap their feet. Show tunes, spirituals, anything that brought joy. He played What a Wonderful World for a woman celebrating her 100th birthday. He played Somewhere Over the Rainbow for a man in hospice whose daughter said it was his favorite song. He played Christmas carols in December and patriotic songs on the 4th of July. Music became his gift to the community. The one thing he could still do, still contribute. The staff loved it. Residents looked forward to it. For 1 hour every Sunday, Golden Years Care Home was transformed from a place people waited to die into a place where beauty still lived. But outside those walls, Clay was forgotten. The music world had moved on. The students he'd taught had their own lives. Even his own children, though they called regularly and visited when they could, were busy with grandchildren and careers and the 1,000 demands of their own aging. Clay understood. He didn't resent it. But there were moments lying awake at 3 in the morning, his arthritis flaring, when he wondered if any of it had mattered. If all those performances, all those barriers broken, all those students taught had left any lasting mark, or if he was just an old man in a care home playing piano for people who wouldn't remember his name tomorrow. He turned 100 in 2017. His children threw a small party cake in the common room, a few residents singing Happy Birthday off-key. It was nice. But it wasn't Carnegie Hall. It wasn't Paris. It wasn't even a full classroom of eager students. Clay looked at the century he'd lived, the wars, the movements, the music, the love, the loss, and felt the weight of it. He was tired. So deeply tired. But every Sunday he still played, because what else was there? Music was all he'd ever had, all he'd ever been. And even if no one remembered, even if his audience was just a handful of residents who'd forget by dinner, the act of playing still meant something. It meant he was still alive, still fighting, still refusing to let the world silence him. He just didn't know that the world was about to discover him all over again. March 15th, 2020. The world was shutting down. COVID-19 was spreading across the globe and care homes were going into lockdown. Families couldn't visit. Activities were canceled. Golden Years Care Home felt more isolated than ever. But it was Sunday, and Clay, 103 years old, made his way to the common room piano. Only a handful of people were there. Residents and staff had to maintain distance now. But Shanice, a nurse's aide who'd grown to love Clay's weekly concerts, sat in the back with her phone out. She'd been documenting life in the care home during the pandemic, posting videos to TikTok to let families see their loved ones when they couldn't visit. That day, Clay played My Favorite Things from The Sound of Music. But he didn't play it straight. He wove it through with jazz improvisation, classical flourishes, techniques from every decade of his life. It was Rodgers and Hammerstein meeting Coltrane, meeting Chopin. It was every musical tradition Clay had ever touched merged into something entirely his own. Shanice filmed it. All 5 minutes. Clay's gnarled hands moving over the keys with surprising grace. His face weathered and peaceful. The few residents who were there swaying gently, some with tears in their eyes. She posted it that night with a simple caption. Mr. Clay is 103 years old and plays piano like an angel. This place is lucky to have him. She had 200 followers. She expected maybe 50 views. The video had 10,000 views by morning, 100,000 by lunch, 1 million by dinner. By the end of the week, it had 40 million views. The internet does this, sometimes takes something small and sincere and amplifies it beyond all reason. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know, who is this man? Where did he learn to play like that? What's his story? Music journalists started digging. They found old reviews from the 1940s. concert programs from the 50s and 60s, articles about the black pianist who'd broken barriers and fought for civil rights through his art. A career that had been largely forgotten suddenly came back into focus. News outlets called Golden Years Care Home. Could they interview Mr. Washington? The staff protective of their residents were hesitant. But Clay, when asked, said yes. Might as well, he said. Not like I'm busy. The interviews went viral too. Clay sitting in his small room, Mrs. Beaumont's piano visible in the background, talking about learning to play in secret, about Jim Crow and conservatory training, and Carnegie Hall, and Dorothy, and teaching and loss, and the 100 years of music he'd lived. He was articulate, funny, gracious. He didn't play the victim, didn't ask for pity. He just told his story like it was the truth with all its pain and beauty. People were captivated. Here was a living link to a different America. A man who'd been born 3 years before the end of World War I, who'd lived through the Depression and Jim Crow and every major event of the 20th century and into the 21st. A man who'd faced down racism with art and never stopped playing. Donations poured into Golden Years Care Home. Offers came in, would Clay like to perform again? Record an album. There was talk of a documentary, a biography. Someone wanted to write a musical about his life. It was overwhelming. Clay, who'd been prepared to live out his final years in quiet obscurity, was suddenly famous in a way he'd never been even at the height of his career. Former students reached out. People he'd taught in the 70s and 80s, now in their 50s and 60s, sent messages saying how much his teaching had meant to them. A woman named Patricia wrote to say that she was now a music professor at Northwestern University, and it was because Clay had believed in her when no one else did. His children were stunned. Angela told reporters, "We always knew Dad was special, but we had no idea the whole world would figure it out." For his 107th birthday in 2024, the New Orleans Symphony Orchestra invited Clay to perform. Not in a care home, in a real concert hall, with a full orchestra behind him. Clay hadn't played with an orchestra in 40 years. His hands were weak, his stamina limited. They'd have to choose something short, something he could physically manage. But the orchestra didn't care. They wanted Clarence Clay Washington on their stage. They chose Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 21, not the full piece, just the famous second movement, the Andante. It's slow, achingly beautiful, not too technically demanding, perfect for 107-year-old hands. Clay practiced for months. His fingers cramped, his back ached, but Dorothy's voice was in his head. Don't forget that it matters. What you're doing matters. The night of the concert, the hall was packed. All of Clay's care home friends were there, transported by bus wheelchair, accessible seating arranged. His children and grandchildren flew in. Former students came. The mayor was there. Local news cameras, and hundreds of people who'd never heard of Clay Washington until a TikTok video showed them what they'd been missing. Clay walked onto the stage with a cane. The audience stood and applauded before he'd played a note. He sat at the Steinway Grand, a far cry from Mrs. Beaumont's piano, from the upright in his care home room, from all the instruments he'd played over a century of life. The conductor raised his baton. The orchestra began, and Clay's hands found the keys. It wasn't perfect. There were missed notes, moments where his fingers didn't quite do what his mind wanted. But it was beautiful, heartbreakingly, impossibly beautiful, because it wasn't about technical perfection anymore. It was about a life lived in service of music. 107 years of love and pain and stubborn, unyielding joy poured through piano keys. When he played the final chord, there was a beat of absolute silence, and then the audience exploded, everyone on their feet, some people crying openly. The orchestra members who'd seen everything were applauding with genuine awe. Clay stood, bowed slightly, and let the moment wash over him. This was better than Carnegie Hall, better than any performance he'd given in his prime, because he'd earned this not just with talent, but with persistence, with refusal to be silenced, with a century of proving that art belongs to everyone. As they helped him off stage, a young black girl, maybe 10 years old, stopped him. "Mr. Clay," she said, "I play piano too. My teacher showed me your video. You're why I want to keep playing." Clay looked at her, saw himself at 4 years old standing outside Mrs. Beaumont's window, saw every student he'd ever taught, saw the future. "Then you keep playing," he said. "Don't let anyone tell you that you can't. Promise me." "I promise," she said. And Clay realized this was it. This was what everything had been for. Not the concerts or the records or the fame. This moment. This child. This promise. His legacy was secure. In the months following that concert, Clay's life became a whirlwind. He was invited to the White House. National Public Radio did a profile. The Smithsonian wanted to archive his recordings. Guinness World Records certified him as the oldest living concert pianist. A scholarship fund was established in his name, the Dorothy and Clarence Washington Music Scholarship, to help black students attend music conservatories. In its first year, it raised over $1 million. 12 students received full scholarships. Patricia Clay's former student, who was now a professor, administered it personally. "You opened the door for us," she told Clay. "Now we're making sure it stays open." But the greatest gift came from an unexpected source. The Chicago Conservatory of Music, the institution that had grudgingly accepted him 85 years earlier, where students had refused to sit next to him, where he'd faced daily humiliation, reached out. They wanted to name their main concert hall after him, the Clarence Clay Washington Hall. They wanted to apologize formally for how he'd been treated. They wanted his story taught to every incoming student as part of their orientation. "We were wrong," the dean said in a public statement. "We failed, Mr. Washington. We failed to recognize his humanity, his brilliance, his importance. We can't change the past, but we can acknowledge it and do better going forward." Clay flew to Chicago for the dedication ceremony. It was held in the very hall where in 1938 he'd given his senior recital to a half-empty room of people who didn't want him there. Now it was full. Now his name would be on the building forever. He didn't give a speech. He was too old, too tired. But he sat at the piano, the same stage he'd stood on as a scared 21-year-old, and he played. Just one piece, Dorothy's favorite, Clair de Lune. His hands shook. He missed notes, but no one cared. Because they weren't hearing the missed notes. They were hearing history, courage, perseverance, love. When he finished, Clay closed his eyes and felt Dorothy next to him. Felt Mrs. Beaumont's hand on his shoulder. Felt the presence of every student he'd taught, every person who'd believed in him, every door he'd kicked open. "We did it," he whispered. "We really did it." Back in New Orleans, life returned to something like normal. The media attention faded. The interviews stopped. But things had changed at Golden Years Care Home. There was a waiting list now of residents who wanted to live there specifically because of Clay. Families would tour the facility and ask, "Is this where the famous pianist lives?" And every Sunday, Clay still played. His audience was bigger now. The common room couldn't hold everyone, so they'd moved his concerts to the dining hall. Residents came. Staff brought their families. People from the neighborhood started showing up, standing in the back just to hear. Clay played everything. classical, jazz, spirituals, pop songs, requests. He played until his fingers ached and his back screamed, and his body reminded him that he was 107 years old, and bodies don't last forever. But his spirit that was eternal, that belonged to the music. On a Sunday afternoon in late 2024, something happened that no one expected. A young man appeared at Golden Years Care Home. He was in his 30s, well-dressed, carrying a violin case. He asked to see Mr. Washington. His name was David. His grandmother had been one of Clay's students in the 1980s. She'd just passed away, but before she died, she'd made David promise to find Mr. Clay and play for him. Grandma said you were the one who taught her that music could be freedom, David explained. She said you gave her the gift of believing in herself. She wanted me to share that gift with you. So David opened his violin case and played. A Bach partita, technically perfect, emotionally rich. And Clay sat in his wheelchair, hands folded in his lap, tears streaming down his face. When David finished, Clay said, "She was a good student. I remember her. Tell me, what do you do now?" "I'm first violin with the New York Philharmonic," David said. Clay laughed. Actually laughed. Then I guess it worked. The gift got passed on. That's when Clay understood the truth. His legacy wasn't in the concerts he'd given, or the barriers he'd broken. It was in the chain. Mrs. Beaumont had given the gift to him. He'd given it to his students. They'd given it to their students. And on, an unbroken line of music and hope and possibility. As long as that chain continued, he would never really die. He would live on in every note played by someone he'd taught, in every barrier broken by someone he'd inspired, in every child who picked up an instrument and thought, if Clay Washington could do it, maybe I can too. That was immortality. Not fame, not recordings, but impact that rippled forward through time, touching lives he'd never meet, shaping futures he'd never see. On a quiet Sunday afternoon in early 2025, Clarence Clay Washington sits at the piano in Golden Years Care Home. He's 107 years old. His hands tremble. His back aches. His eyes don't focus like they used to. But when he places his fingers on the keys, something miraculous still happens. The room transforms. Time stops. And for a few precious minutes, everyone present is connected to something larger than themselves. Clay plays My Funny Valentine, slowly, carefully pouring a lifetime of love into every note. He plays it for Dorothy, who's been gone 10 years but feels close enough to touch. He plays it for Mrs. Beaumont, who risked everything to teach a sharecropper's son. He plays it for every student he ever believed in, every door he ever opened, every person who told him he couldn't and was proven wrong. And he plays it for the little girl he met after his concert, who promised to keep playing, for David and his grandmother, for every person in the chain who received the gift and passed it on. When the song ends, Clay sits quietly for a moment. Then he looks at the people gathered around him, residents and staff and visitors, and he smiles. Music. He says his voice, soft but clear, is the only language we all speak. It doesn't care about the color of your skin or where you're from or how much money you have. It just cares if you mean it, if you're telling the truth with your whole heart. He pauses, takes a breath. I've been playing piano for 103 years, and I still don't know everything about it. I still discover new things, still get surprised. That's the beautiful part, you never finish learning. You just keep going deeper. Someone asks, "Do you have any regrets, Mr. Clay?" He thinks about it. I wish the world had been kinder. I wish I could have just been a musician, not a symbol. I wish Dorothy was still here. His eyes get distant for a moment. But regrets? No. Because every struggle taught me something. Every barrier I faced made me stronger. Every time someone told me I couldn't, I practiced harder and proved them wrong. That's not something to regret. That's something to celebrate. What would you tell young musicians today, someone else asks? Clay's eyes light up. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the world to tell you you're good enough. If you have music in you, play it. Share it. Use it to break down walls and build bridges. That's what music is for, bringing people together, reminding us that we're all human, all connected. He looks down at his hands, gnarled and spotted, but still capable of beauty. These hands picked cotton. These hands weren't supposed to touch a piano, but they did. They played Carnegie Hall. They taught hundreds of students. They held the woman I loved. They lived a full life. And they're not done yet. The room is silent. Everyone feels the weight of his words, the power of his presence. This man who's lived through a century of American history, who's seen the worst of humanity, and refused to let it break him, who turned prejudice into purpose and pain into art. Clay turns back to the piano. He plays one more song, a spiritual his mother used to hum while she worked. Deep river, simple, pure, profound. And as the notes float through the room and out the windows into the New Orleans air, everyone understands. This is more than music. This is testimony. This is witness. This is proof that the human spirit, when given voice, is unstoppable. Clarence Clay. Washington is 107 years old. He's lived long enough to see the world change slowly and painfully, but change nonetheless. He's lived long enough to see his legacy take root and grow. He's lived long enough to know that what he started will continue long after he's gone. And that's enough. More than enough. That's everything. The music plays on. The gift continues. The chain remains unbroken. And somewhere a child who's never heard of Jim Crow or segregation or the barriers Clay Washington spent a lifetime breaking down sights at a piano for the first time presses a key and discovers magic. That child doesn't know it yet, but they're part of Clay's legacy, part of the chain, part of the proof that music like truth cannot be silenced. It can only grow louder.